broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans. Producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows. Interviewing celebrities and showrunners. And bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another after show for Madam Secretary Season 1, Episode 18. The time is at hand. Of course, you can find us on youtube.com/AfterBuzzTV and also on SoundCloud, Twitter, Instagram @AfterBuzzTV. I'm Sterling Cates, and you can find me on Twitter @Sterling Cates. And joining me is April Whisenhant.
Hey, you can find me on Twitter @April Whisenhant.
Woo woo! All right, so let's get on into it.
Yeah.
We finally have some Henry back in action.
Thank God.
Yes.
I loved how this episode was kind of centered around him because, I mean, everyone knows we love Henry. We love everyone, but we love Henry.
So for those of you tuning in, before we come and do this after show, we watch the episode together and we kind of, talk about it there, but save most of it for the talk. But April says, I really am into this episode. And it's obviously because Henry is the main part of it.
Exactly.
At least for me anyway. That was,
me too.
Him being in the forefront of all the action, not only at home, but also on the whole political aspect of it as well. I always love seeing him.
I do too. And I love seeing him be able to express his intelligence. And it's so funny to me, the comment that Stevie made at the very end, like, you sit in buildings and do this? It's like, do you know what your dad just did? I mean, clearly she doesn't because she can't.
Yeah.
But I love seeing him being like conversating with the minister and everything and just kind of showing that, like, hey, yes, I am the Secretary of State's husband, but like, no, I'm completely legitimate and awesome.
Right. Well, even with what she does know that he does for a living, that comment was way off.
Yeah.
What's new? Because, I mean, he's a professor. He does a lot of things. He doesn't just sit around. Mm-hmm. Anyways, but we don't, Stevie can be that way sometimes.
Yes.
So
she's a little stubborn.
Yeah.
Like her mom.
I know. Well, we'll talk more about her in just a second.
Yes.
But before we get to Stevie, so we start off this episode at the Society for Global Aid Gala, where Elizabeth is giving a speech written by Matt.
It's a hit.
It's funny. We've got laughter at the right moments, and everything's happening as planned. She's, kind of roasting certain people like Russell.
I was nervous about him for a second. I'm like, what is she going to say? But then it was okay.
Yeah. And they cut to Matt a lot, mouthing the words to the speech. And that was a cute moment. And so her speech was successful. And afterwards, Matt is approached by Zach, who he used to go to school with at some level. They said senior year, so I'm assuming that was college,
right,
or whatever. But Zach is now head of this huge production of is it Fusillade Press.
That's what we're thinking. It's called Fusillade.
Yeah. But apparently it has a huge outreach, is highly renowned. And
everyone in their office reads it.
Yeah. So Zach offers to do an exclusive with Matt to kind of cover, this guy just wrote this successful speech for the Secretary of State. You should look out for him in the future, blah, blah, blah. So they end up doing an interview with Matt, and it comes out the next day as like he's the next one to watch situation. So I don't know. And so Matt kind of gets a big head from all of that. What did you think about that?
The sunglasses were ridiculous. I mean, come on. And I get it because, it's just like we see Mike B say later, go back into your little hole pretty much. But he's not used to getting the recognition, and because the Secretary of State has to get all of the recognition. So he gets a little bit, and he just takes it way too far.
Yeah. Well, I mean, good for him that he gets this recognition finally, whatever. But I feel like when he does have a job like the one he has, he isn't writing for Colbert, or he isn't writing for a show like that. He's writing for the Secretary of State. He, like Mike B said, he is there to make one person look good, and that person is not himself.
Right.
So yeah, I thought the whole him coming in with glasses and this nice suit and the whole thing was overboard for sure. But it was funny. But the point was he's not the one there to be the famous one.
And see, he even knows that, like, having this job, he has to know that. And obviously, we as a nation know that the speeches that our leaders make aren't written by them, even if, the points or whatever, most of the time they are written by a writer. But it is like, when you kind of really get to thinking about that, it kind of takes your level of respect down a little bit. So it's like, oh, doing an article about how awesome I am and about how I wrote this speech that our Secretary of State like killed it with, that kind of takes it down a notch. And Mike B is always just trying to project her up, as they all should be, but he clearly gets very pissed at Matt.
Well, yeah, and with him doing an interview like this, it's kind of like those are all of his words, not Madam Secretary's words, and she has that position where you would want all of those words to be hers. But then the only other thing I have to say about that is when the interview is offered to Matt, Daisy's there, and she seems very approving of it.
Right.
And you would think if anyone were to have any red flags about it would be her, just because she is head of PR.
Right.
And if she saw a problem with it or didn't see a problem with it, then I would trust that judgment. But she seemed to think it was fine.
I think so too. And so I thought that was kind of weird, because even whenever he was accepting it and saying like, yes, I want to do this, in my mind, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know if he can do that.
Right.
But maybe she just didn't think that it would go the way that he was thinking. Maybe it was more like of an expose, but not about like, oh, I write this and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Instead of this is the next up and coming writer, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But so even when he came into the office the next day, she was like, I think you're overdoing it just a little. Like, didn't need the glasses.
Let's take the sunglasses off.
Yeah. But again, I love Mike B so much. I love his addition to the show. And probably my favorite line of the show is when he says, shut up and sit down. And he was like, I thought you were talking about your dog.
I would never use that tone with Gordon.
Yeah. Gordon's at daycare and I would never speak to him that way. So yeah, that was great. I love him. He just has like little parts of each episode, but they're always the highlight. Highlight. So let's get into the next topic before we get into the huge overarching thing. So we have Stevie. We'll go back to her. We know that she's had this unpaid internship with the microloans place, and we see them kind of horsing around the office in the beginning, and there's like a younger attractive guy who I was like, oh, she's got a little romance
Me
there.
too.
And but we see the boss Arthur looking from through the door or whatever at her, and him kind of flirting, and that was kind of weird.
He doesn't necessarily like it.
Yeah, so we find out later she's like dressing up nice to go to work early, and she has a date, and he comes to the house where Elizabeth and Henry are.
And he had to sign in with security and everything, so clearly like the jig is gonna be up.
Yeah, and Stevie hasn't told her parents yet about that she's dating not only her boss,
but her 39-year-old boss.
Yeah, he's 39. He has an 8-year-old daughter. She basically just graduated high school, so he's twice her age.
She can't drink.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny whenever Henry's like, oh, would you like a drink? I mean, Stevie's not of age yet, but
you look like you are.
Yeah.
So obviously they're not just going to let Stevie just go off on her own once they realize what's happening here.
Right.
So they invite Arthur in to kind of get to know him. They're picking his brain about, how he got to where he is. He, says he's had a daughter. He was married before. He used to protest. And he's the 1% in this whole thing. And Henry's kind of giving him a hard time, and
as he should be.
Yeah, as he should be.
There's got to be, I mean, clearly, even Arthur says at one point, he's like, the things that, I don't follow the rules, or I don't always like following the rules. And the times that I haven't followed them, it's turned out to be great. And then we see Stevie like lovingly grab his hand and that sort of thing. And I'm just like, huh?
Yeah, it was a lot. And you see Elizabeth and Henry kind of like, get feeling really uncomfortable and not approving. But I think they did a good job considering, of not being like, you need to never see my daughter again, blah, blah, blah. I thought they put on a very good front for the most part. They only cringed when Stevie turned.
Right. Well, it's just like, so the last we kind of saw of this guy was the first time we really met him, and was right when she started working for the microloan program. And you remember there was like kind of like a flirty little tension between them.
Yeah.
And so now this is this developed thing, because clearly it's been happening for a while, but it just seemed like too far along and too progressed.
Yeah, I guess it's a lot has been happening at the office that we don't see.
Right.
But yeah, so I guess we'll see more and more about their relationship. I was hoping it would be that other guy that was like spinning her around in the chair. But I guess that's what
too easy for them.
That's what they wanted us to think. But yeah, so we do see Henry and Stevie talking about it and how, you know, Henry doesn't necessarily approve and they're kind of butting heads there. But I thought Henry brought up a good point about Arthur having very strong convictions, and that's completely fine. Everyone should have their own opinions on things, but he didn't like how Stevie was automatically just having those same convictions that Arthur has right off the bat.
And she does that with so many things, and they kind of, you know, she's their daughter, so that clearly they know, like, and some people are just that way. I've been the same way before, where you kind of like get like a fad in your life and you're super into it, and then it's like, yeah, not so much. But I mean, Stevie,
but when it's like influenced by someone you're in a relationship with or whatever, then that definitely is alarming, especially to parents.
Exactly. And she's so young. Her mind is so moldable at this point. Henry is absolutely 100% correct in saying, like, I want her to have her own opinions, and if she believes this because that's her belief, then so be it. But he wants her to make those decisions for herself, not because her influential boyfriend puts them in her mind.
Exactly. And I'm really glad you said that, because that goes along with this whole next topic of the religious cult. And the whole point of them going down there is so that the people who are in this cult can make the decision whether or not they still want to be there for the mass suicide or whatever. So we'll get into that more. But kind of on a way, way smaller level is Henry, you know, he just got back from this trip. He's wanting her to know that she needs to make her own ideas and opinions about certain things and not be so persuaded by other people. But that is obviously a much smaller level of what's actually happening in Bolivia in this episode. So there is the Covenant of John, which is a religious group that is led by Reverend Wesley Finch. And basically it's this whole mass suicide that is going to happen because they think the end of the world's coming. Right. And so they have this huge cult in Bolivia. And so a father comes to Madam Secretary, approaches her, basically attacks her at the Society for the Global Aid event.
Her detail was freaking out.
They were every time he like tried to like reach for her, they were just like grabbing. He was very aggressive. But the reason that he was there is the Congressman Larry Ames had sent him there, and sent him to go there because they couldn't get in touch with the State Department, or they got an appointment for months away or whatever. But this is all happening right now, so they just wanted to get to her.
And his daughter is in the group, and it's in the cult, and he wants to save her.
Yeah, so his daughter Christine is a member of this thing, is very passionate about it, and he knows that this mass suicide is going to happen because they sent an email to all of the families saying that this was going to happen. So obviously this is a huge thing because there's lots of U.S. citizens involved, and it's in another country, so this is put on Madam Secretary's plate.
Exactly.
Just because that comes along with the territory.
Yeah.
But what her team has to do is figure out how they can prevent this mass suicide without interfering with religious freedom.
Exactly. And to me, it's like, ultimately, there is no like perfect way other than kind of how they did it, because you have to at least or they wanted to give them the option to leave, like you said, but you also can't force someone to leave. Yeah. If they're there by choice, they're not doing anything illegal. I mean, technically killing yourself isn't a crime, I guess. Well, how can it be illegal? But
well, I thought it was a great point. Well, naturally she tells Henry about what's happening because he is this world-renowned religious scholar. He knows all about this. He knows all of the literature. He knows everything because he teaches it, and he's obviously a doctor in that area. So she's talking to him about it, asking him to look into it. That's the only extent of it. And Henry then brings up a really good point about, because she's figuring out a way how we can talk them out of it. And I liked his point that when he said, these are their beliefs, you can't really just talk someone out of their beliefs. Exactly. And, no matter how crazy they are,
they believe it.
Yeah, they believe it. And so you can't just, I don't think you should do that, and then they don't do it. But if someone is has these very strong convictions that the world is ending. I mean, you can't just call him up and say it's not actually ending.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you have to find another way around it.
And they keep comparing it to the Waco situation, which obviously ended very badly after government intervention, because that was basically just like a forced thing by the government, and then it ended terribly, obviously. And so they're trying to figure out a different way to go about it. And basically without the help of Bolivia, the Bolivian government, because she even talks to, I think, the ambassador?
Yeah, so it's the Bolivia ambassador who is in Orange is the New Black.
Yes.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw
like, yeah. So love seeing her.
Me too.
And so they need to convince Bolivia that there is a threat happening. But with the history with Bolivia, she said they were underwhelmed. So they needed more in order to take action.
Well, but there was the situation where the DEA went in there. They thought like some illegal activity was happening at a plant, but it turned out it wasn't. Lots of Bolivian citizens were killed. Obviously, it was a mistake on our government's part, but they're still not over it. And so in order to give us any help, they're like, you saying that these people are going to commit suicide isn't enough for us to like give you aid or to let you send in a team either. So
they needed more. But after that meeting with the Bolivian ambassador, we don't really see much interaction with that again.
Right.
Mainly because Russell is already alerted of everything that's happening, and the president wants to get in front of all of this that's happening, especially after the coup, and they don't want another U.S. congressman to die.
Well, because he snuck down there, even though he wasn't supposed to.
Right. So after Madam Secretary meets with Larry Ames, who is the congressman, who is very passionate about what's happening. And but she tells her team to not allow Larry any sort of travel to Bolivia, not to let him go down there. But he finds a way. He finds a group that is willing to sponsor him, and he gets down there.
And
long story short, he gets held captive, an armed kidnapping, so we know that they're dangerous and armed. And
they have weapons. They have this poison that can basically automatically. I forgot what it was called.
Yeah, they keep the poison on them, so whenever they get the signal, they just kill themselves. So it could happen at any moment. So that's why Russell and the president are so adamant about getting in front of this, because they honestly, first of all, can't afford for another U.S. government official to be involved in something like this, even though he is being held hostage. But they also can't have this mass suicide happen under their watch, especially now that they know about it. So it all comes back to Henry, and Elizabeth just wants to set up a phone call between Henry and Reverend Finch, to not try to persuade him out of it, but to get the point across that it should be their choice, the people in this cult's choice. You can open the gates to where they're all living and see if they leave. And if they leave, then that's their choice, and that's their religious freedom to do so. But if they stay, then, it's their choice, and you can't really do anything about it.
And she just wants him to make a phone call over there, because clearly, the Finch has already released another message saying, like, if anyone messes with us, pretty much, like, you become part of it, you're our captive, whatever. And that's why, since the president and Russell are so like with everything that's been going on, they just want to send in a team. But she's like, no, that's not good enough, so let's do this phone call. But clearly that's not enough for the president either.
I was wondering how they were going to get this phone call arranged.
Me too. I'm like,
I'm sure she has her ways, but how can he be sure that he's talking to him? And
clearly something happened, because even whenever Henry, the president says he wants Henry to go to Bolivia, he doesn't want to take any half measures, and we know that, or Henry says something like, I approved this with Finch. So clearly there's some line of communication with them, obviously.
Yeah. So it turns from a phone call to Henry going there and speaking with Finch in person. So obviously, Elizabeth is a little skeptical about sending Henry down there, because it is a dangerous situation. She just got back from this, from the attack that happened during the whole coup episode that we saw, and then how that's affecting her now. She's still having her anxiety and
not taking her meds.
Let's talk about that for a second before we talk about Henry.
Them.
Yeah, so we see Henry giving her medicine in the morning, but she just puts it in her pocket and doesn't take it. And we never actually see her taking the medicine.
Right. And she
for her
gets
anxiety.
worked up like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and you can
really
hear the
no
bells
reason.
ringing. Yeah.
So I think that it's something that she should be doing. You know, we kind of touched on that last week. Well, are they just going to make her fine? She definitely seems much, much, much better.
Yeah.
But she still is having these moments of super intense anxiety. And she's the Secretary of State. She can't have that.
Well, she has a super high stress job, obviously. But her not taking the medicine, I get that she doesn't know how her body will react to the medicine or
Take
like
it
what
on
it'll
off
do.
Day. Take it on Sunday.
She doesn't really get an off day, but
but
you know, it is concerning though, because you don't know if it'll make you just pass out or how exactly you'll be affected. But it's also not risking a heart attack or another panic attack. And Henry made a good point about that. But so yeah, we hear the bells ringing in her ears when all of this is happening, and so I just really hope that she finds something out, you know, to handle the anxiety.
She finds an outlet to make her stress level go a little farther down.
Because PTSD just doesn't go away.
Exactly.
You know, it's got to be treated. It's got to be, you know, handled right at the beginning of it, because it will just, you know, some days you'll be fine and then other days you won't be, and the weirdest thing can trigger it. So I want her to get it under control.
I want her to be better.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to Henry's mission to Bolivia. He has the whole security detail. They've got snipers in place just to be safe, because we do know that they're armed.
Right.
And they want to protect Henry, obviously, at all costs. And he is greeted at the gates by Christine, who is Mr. Coomer's daughter, who is the one at the beginning of the episode alerted Madam Secretary about everything that's happening with the email. So she is apparently very close to Reverend Finch, because she is the messenger, like bringing people to and from him. She seems to be one of the leaders, because even at the end, she was the one that called out the gathering and called out everyone. So
she seemed just very like, hi, welcome. Like I don't know. She just seemed like she was in a state of,
she 100% seemed brainwashed. Couldn't say that for a second. So she tells Henry when he gets to the gate that he can't bring in the security detail. He can't be wired.
Right.
And even though Reverend Finch had agreed to that before, he says that he's had a change of heart and only wants it to be Henry.
Right. And Henry does it.
Yeah.
I actually wasn't surprised by that.
Henry's a hero.
Exactly. I was thinking, like, the whole time I'm like, don't. But I knew he was going to do it. Yeah. Because he's not just going to go all the way there and then, turn around for these people to all kill themselves in a week or however much time is left.
Yeah.
And, I mean, obviously, Beth was going to freak out because her husband's going into such a crazy situation where we already know that the last person who walked in there, the congressman, is now being held captive in a cave by them.
Exactly.
But, I mean, Henry's Henry. He's not going to give up.
Well, but now we have all of the security detail there, and they can get an ear in there.
Yeah, they got like
listen.
a crazy tall mic.
Yeah, they've got a microphone that they can get in there, and they have the snipers that have a visual inside for the most part. Not to say that it's not dangerous him going in there, but I was going to say,
they have a very limited visual. It's like of a little concave
but it's not like
opening.
him just completely going into the dark and they can't hear anything. So he does have some backup to that level. I wish they had something like more discreet on him other than that huge earpiece. Like they could have like put like a little camera, like maybe like in his button. Yeah, you know.
Should we join the government?
Yeah, maybe. That's or a writer.
Should we join the government?
Join the government. No, I do not want to do that. But yeah, so they could have wired him another way, I feel like.
Yeah.
Instead of just that massive earpiece.
That's like what Britney Spears wears when she's in concert. She's like, that's what he had on.
Yeah, Henry is just trying to channel his inner Britney, I guess. But so Christine takes Henry in by himself without any wire or whatever. We lose visual of him for a second, but eventually they get the microphone working and they can hear what's happening inside the tent. But at first, Henry's in the tent with Jeff, who is the deputy for Reverend Finch.
Yeah,
and
he's like the Russell Jackson.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
chief of staff, if you will.
Yes.
Of
the right-hand man.
Cult. Yeah. But Henry's trying to have a conversation with Jeff, and he just isn't responding. He's obviously very skeptical of Henry being there.
more skeptical than the Reverend was, which is, I mean, that's never how it should be. If anyone's going to be skeptical or like judge something just right off the bat, it should be the man in charge, not the person behind the man.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Well, but Reverend Finch loved Henry.
Right.
He was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here."
So exciting.
Yeah, he was like fangirling hard for Henry.
Yeah.
Like, for sure. And like in my notes, I just have Finch loves Henry. And but so Henry is engaging in conversation with Finch. Finch seems very interested in Henry's background. So let's just talk about Henry's story for a second.
Yeah.
So Finch asks Henry how he got involved with studying religion and
why he wants to study God, pretty much.
Right, exactly. And Henry tells a story about when he was an altar boy and he was awarded the privilege of ringing the bell. And when he got that opportunity to do so, he says he didn't ring the bell.
Right.
And then we learn that 2 weeks earlier, a friend of his had died in a frozen pond, didn't come back up. And the Reverend had said, he said, God, we lose sight of God.
God went silent on me before, or something like that.
God goes silent on us all. And so for him to hear that from a Reverend who should never, to him at that point would be like,
it's just
God should never go silent on us if we believe.
Wrong wordage.
Yeah.
For sure.
So that's why he didn't ring the bell. And that's when he, like he says, got hooked and wanted to study God and how people, believe in it or don't believe in it or what God they do believe in.
Right.
So I found that very interesting. And Madam Secretary said in the Situation Room that Henry doesn't just tell that story to anyone.
Right. And I don't think, obviously he wanted to establish a certain level of trust with Finch.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he told him that story just for that reason. Because I think that Finch, even though his ideas may be radical, they are still his, just like Henry said, they're his beliefs. Yeah. And, no matter what anyone says to Henry, no matter what anyone says to me, like, I believe what I believe, so you're not going to change it. So I think it was a way of him to, because he kept saying, like, he just wants to be recognized, or, leaders who, a lot of times, doomsday groups, they just feel the need, they're pressured to like pick a date, like, oh, when is this going to be? And so he thinks that that's what Finch just needs, is to be like recognized as, a kind of a religious professional. So I feel like sharing that story was a way to establish trust, but it was also like, this is, I know this is so meaningful to you, this is why this is so meaningful to me.
Right, I agree. And going off that, Henry did say earlier that Finch is a religious scholar, so they do have that in common, and they have that story. And Finch seemed fairly reasonable to me. It was Jeff that was a little sketchy. But during the conversation, what Finch was very interested, he was engaging in conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what Henry said. He likes that debate. He's a scholar. He likes to hear other people's thoughts and blah, blah, blah.
They say that even with his congregation, he prefers for people to debate back instead of just like blindly listen.
Right.
I mean, clearly they're blindly listening in this situation, but he wants, that argument so that he can prove, I use air quotes purposefully there, obviously, but so that he can prove what he's saying is true. Yeah.
But it seems like an easy sell if he engages in debate and all of this stuff, to say, because Henry says, religion is a quest, or finding your faith is a quest for everybody, and it's your personal journey that you go on, and so that's why you should open your gates, and if your people stay, then they're with you. They believe in what you're saying. If they leave, then you can't keep them here against their will.
Exactly.
So first of all, let me just rewind for a second. When Christine brings in the tea, we were both like, maybe shouldn't drink that. And then later Russell said, is it just me, or should he not drink the tea?
And we're like, Russell!
We're like, nope, it's not just you. It's everyone watching
because I just kept thinking of I'm like, don't drink the Kool-Aid. That's all I could think. And because clearly we've seen that be very bad in other real life situations. But
that didn't have anything to do with it.
No.
At the end of the day, it could have. Yeah, the tea was fine. Don't worry, guys. It was Jeff that we had to worry about.
Yeah.
So we see Jeff like trying to tell Finch something. It seems like he's like been alerted of something.
Well, it's kind of right as he sees Finch kind of being like,
like
once Henry starts
intrigued.
being like, if this is, if you want to make sure that they believe you and that they are your followers, let them choose, even he says the thing about Jesus being human and not can be fallible and la 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 la, but it's like, if no one has ever forced anyone, well, I mean, other than like when governments force religion on people. But I mean, religious leaders have never said you must believe me. And in order to find out who actually does truly follow you and whether they truly believe that,
give
them the
option.
choice. Don't keep them inside a gate locked with, a huge lock.
Exactly.
Locked with a huge lock.
Yeah. No,
With a
exactly. But when
big
Jeff was
key.
eating off of that knife, I was like, something's about to go down.
Oh, yeah.
And so Jeff takes Henry by the knife and is basically, for a second I thought that he was like one of the ones who wants to leave but is being like held there because he was like, you made us all come down here and like you're keeping us all in here,
And he's like, and now you're
changing your mind, you can't do that, blah blah. So I get that frustration, first of all, because they're all being basically held captive down there,
right?
Whether they know they are or not. But Jeff seems to know. He's like, okay, you brought us all down here to Bolivia. You can't just change your mind when we've already decided to kill ourselves for this cause.
Right.
You know what I mean? So Jeff obviously has reason to feel passionate, but he doesn't need to take Henry by the throat.
He thinks Henry is an aggravator, pretty much.
Yeah.
Someone who's just, he's turning you and whatever. But he knows, clearly he knows the power of words because he's been, persuaded to believe this because of what Finch has said.
Yeah.
And obviously he's very extremely passionate about it because I just kept thinking whenever he pulled Henry back and had the knife like right at his neck, I'm like, he's just going to draw like a little blood and do something to like,
Henry.
No. But those snipers are trying to get a shot the entire time.
Yeah. Well, Henry kind of does a little back jab to him and he puts him in a position that the sniper is able to shoot Jeff. So Jeff dies and you see Finch like doesn't really know what to do exactly.
He doesn't react.
Doesn't really react. But Henry starts praying with him, and you kind of feel like something might good happen. Like maybe Finch will change his mind or whatever because they're praying, blah blah. But it's when Christine comes in, sees the dead body, drops the tea or whatever, that Finch tells her that the time is nigh.
Right.
And she runs out screaming that to the rest of the cult. So at that point, though, they have a choice to drink or to take the poison that they have, or to not, because the whole armed forces are there taking them.
Yeah, and they're there because he said Alamo, which was the move to like let them all come in, because whenever that started happening, clearly it was like, they're about to kill themselves, so then let the people out.
Well, and the other thing about it is they didn't know, like we didn't know. I say we, but I mean like the president and like that whether or not they had the poison on them at all times. Like they could have been like storing it for when the time is right or whatever. But apparently they did have it on them, and approximately 30 of them took it. When Henry comes back, we learn that 37 are dead.
Right.
But there were so many that were saved.
Right. You see so many like children get off because the parents took the children with them. And that was an important thing that Henry said in there. He's like, you have to let them believe this, because a child, especially someone that young, like they don't know
exactly what they believe in.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't, I don't know. I'm just happy that so many of them got saved, except for, Mr. Krumer's daughter, Christine. But she was clearly one of the leaders. She didn't. We see her like leading a pack of people into a cave.
She's the one who tells everyone to do it.
Right.
She does the little
I was sad for him, though.
Yeah, that was a really sad moment when they're all coming back and he's there waiting for her. With flowers. And it was also an emotional storyline because he talks about how difficult it was for his wife to get pregnant. And he had that necklace that he gave to Elizabeth in hopes of returning her safe, because someone in a fertility group have given that to his wife.
Right.
And then after she received that necklace, she got pregnant. So it's kind of like a good luck charm.
Right.
So he obviously really cherished his daughter because it wasn't something that was technically supposed to happen.
Right. And I don't think that he realized her intensity in it. But that's why, he asked Bess at the end, he's like, she did it herself? And she said yes. And
well, I think he genuinely wanted to believe that, she was being held, not that he wanted her to be a hostage by any means, but that she wouldn't stay there.
And that she wouldn't
for her own
kill herself.
Yeah,
right.
that she didn't want to believe that she would do something like that. So for her to, give him that news that she did kill herself on her own will. No one actually forced her to. That's heartbreaking, especially for a parent to hear. And she tries to give him the necklace back, and he just walks away. Yeah. So that was pulling on my heartstrings. It was an emotional moment. Yeah. So Henry's back, and he basically saved the day, but he's feeling a little guilty because there were 37 casualties, but there would have been so many more if he hadn't been there.
Exactly.
So that wraps up the episode with that. Should we get into some predictions?
Yes.
And now, your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
I don't even know where to go with predictions at this point.
Yeah, well, we talked last week about wanting Henry to be back in action, and we got that this week, so that was good. What in the promo, what do we see? We see just another...
the guy saying that the only bad thing that happened from the coup, he's talking to the president, was, it just made his judgment look bad.
Yeah. So it looks like I want to see more about the president. Mm-hmm. And is he good? Is he bad? Because we see Madam Secretary at the end saying, I didn't even want to be Madam Secretary, like the Secretary would say, I'm here because of you. Mm-hmm. So I want to know what that conversation is.
I think it's probably like because she's not getting the brunt of anything from the coup, but of course she's not. She saved the day, essentially, even though obviously the president is numero uno. Even if it was her that saved the day, he still technically gets the credit because he delegates to all of them, but he also gets the backlash from it. And I think that he's just probably having a problem with that and is talking to her about, like, you did all of this and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Because I think people are also saying really, really great things specifically about her right now, and maybe some bad things about him. So I think he's probably a little like,
oh, he probably just feels like she's taking his light, and that she might want to run for president or have some like competition.
And that's why I feel like that could be why she says, like, I'm here because of you. Like, I didn't even want to be here.
Yeah. She's like the Matt to his Madam Secretary.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
So much.
So I want to predict about Stevie. I feel like this relationship with Arthur isn't going to last. Something
about it.
I just feel like I definitely think she's very smart. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if she's like mature enough for a relationship with a 40-year-old man. Like, I can't imagine Stevie as a mom to that 8-year-old.
No, not at all.
You know what I mean? Like, I get her being in a relationship with him. That could maybe work. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he has a daughter, I just can't picture her as a mother type figure.
I think it'll go on for a bit, but I think that it's not going to ultimately go anywhere. Yeah, just to be something, but I don't think it's going to ultimately go anywhere. Like, I don't see wedding bells in the future or anything like that. But yeah, I think it'll just be a thing. It could ultimately be a good thing for her because she could learn a lot from it. But I think that, that's not going to be anything.
Yeah, I feel you. All right. Well, that about does it for us this week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. April, where can we find you on social media?
Y'all can find me on Twitter and Instagram at April Whisenhant.
And you can find me at Sterling Cage, and of course, all of us at AfterBuzz TV. Yes. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.